So thank you for inviting me to speak at this Women Ed Middle East and North Africa event today. I've just introduced myself. I work with PhD students these days, investigating the topics of women, gender and feminism in educational leadership in a range of contexts, including secondary and higher education in the UK and higher education in Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Much of my teaching is focused on master's degree work in educational leadership and management, and many of our students work in international schools. I'm currently working on a paper with former students as co-authors. One leads an international school in China, the other leads in an independent school in England. Our paper is a cross-sector comparison of the distribution of women in secondary school leadership. I can't say much about that piece of research yet because it hasn't yet been published. So, this is me, and I did this piece of work for an autoethnography, looking at my life in education, career as a teacher and leader and academic across those 9 pictures from 0 to 56. And I wrote that up as a paper called the 7-Up Intersectionality Life Grid, a tool for reflexive practice, and that's available on open access. You don't need to have access to academic papers to be able to get that. Anyone can read that. So I will come back to that later. And I have been a Women Ed East Midlands since 2016. Member of an international scholarly network, Women Leading Education Across Continents, and there are my contact details if anybody wanted them. So that get in the way of women's career advancement appear to hold true in many contexts, including in international schools, across educational sectors and countries. They demonstrated the way multi-level barriers operate against contexts for individual women teachers and leaders. So there's the macro socio-political level, and I would add cultural and historical to that. The meso, the organizational level, and I would add sector to that. And the micro level, which concerns the woman herself. And I would add that the individual barriers are produced by the other levels. Today, I want to focus my talk less on women's advancement and more on the importance in educational leadership of developing cultural understandings. It's a topic that comes up from time to time among international school staff in our MA programme. But this applies just as much in the English state education system as in international schools in countries across the globe. So I want to focus on the title of the talk, Gender Justice and Feminism, the two terms. What do we mean by these? I'm going to refer to research carried out for my new book, Feminist Perspectives on Contemporary Educational Leadership, being published at the end of this month. And so that is brand new. And the book reports findings from several research projects. I was fortunate enough to collaborate with colleagues in international contexts on 2 projects that looked at women's headship. I interviewed 8 women of global majority heritages leading schools in England. All were committed to education for social justice, even if they saw their leadership practice within that rather differently. I used the lens of intersectionality to think about their experiences of powerful and powerlessness, as that fluctuated over time and depending on circumstances. All had experienced racism in the English education context as school children, teachers and leaders. 3 of the women identified as Muslims. It occurred to me that the degree of
عدد من
Islamophobia
النساء التي كانت تعرف عليهم مسلمين هم
exists
تواجه العنصرية.
in the UK, particularly around the time of interviewing, there was a media frenzy about a so-called Trojan horse affair that caused a lot of damage to schools serving Muslim families in Birmingham, where I live, and including Muslim teachers and leaders, and the EU referendum and its aftermath. Those things meant I should include religion in an explanation of Muslim women's intersectional identities and experiences as head teachers, the way that gender intersects with race, ethnicity, and religion. That took me to scholarship about Islam, gender, and feminism. My friend, Dr. Saeeda Shah, formerly at the University of Leicester, and with me, a co-convener of the Belmas Gender and Leadership Research Interest Group, has written a great deal about this in the context of English schools, as well as universities in Pakistan and Malaysia. There's also a body of research developing led by Professor Khalid Arrar, who has, as you said earlier, spoken to your group already. Khalid is making sure that women's voices are heard from a range of contexts in efforts to decolonize knowledge about educational leadership. Through my reading, I learned some Muslim women scholars and activists reject the term feminism and others embrace it. If we're to develop cultural understanding in schools and universities in a variety of country contexts and among diverse populations of students and staff, we need to understand how different women see and experience gender struggles in different cultures. So, the relationship between Islam and feminism is highly contested. Scholars question whether the conjunction of Islam and feminism is an oxymoron, a contradiction in terms. From a Western perspective, the challenge belies Muslim women's consciousness of feminine identity and lack of parity with men, such as in women's writing in the 19th and early 20th centuries in Iran and Lebanon. Their social activism in settings such as Iran as early as 1907, in relation to family law in Morocco, during the Arab Spring, the slut walk in London, scholarly activism, and holding political power in countries such as Pakistan and Iran. From the perspective of Muslim scholars, the challenge deliberately rejects Western feminist ideology in favor of Islamic beliefs. It resists labels and demonstrates post-colonial sensitivity, whilst recognizing the value of, for example, Black feminist thought. In the 1980s, religious women in Egypt were re-examining the Quran from a gender perspective. However, they eschewed feminism and the label feminist. There are clear distinctions between secular feminism, Islamist feminism, and Muslim or Islamic feminism. Secular feminism is located in a discourse of international human rights and universal standards, such as the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. It operates outside religious belief and can be found in countries where Islam is the dominant and/or state religion. Islamist feminism is associated with women's involvement in political Islam. It argues for women's involvement in the public world, except in matters of religion, and upholds the patriarchal family in the private world. Islamic feminism argues for women's equality with men in all public spheres, including the religious. Its challenge to religious patriarchy is particularly radical. By definition, Islamic feminism is based on Muslim women scholars' interpretation of the Quran and Hadiths, or ijtihad, reconciling this with international human rights. Moghadam claims that a proper debate on Islamic feminism began in the 1990s. In short, Islam is seen as compatible with gender justice. Islamic feminism might be aligned with feminist and liberation theology, and we might think in terms of other religious feminisms, such as Jewish feminism and Christian feminism. So to summarize, CDAT frames gender justice and sex equality in Islam alternately as keeping Islam and feminism separate, or using feminist methods but rejecting feminism's hegemonies, resisting being positioned as feminism's other, the imposition of feminist conceptualizations and labels, and taking for granted that sex equality has always been present in Islam. So Muslim women scholars and activists, among others, have very good reasons for not wanting to adopt feminist as a label. That's without addressing the political connotations that might make it dangerous to self-identify as feminist in some contexts. This scholarship helped me to understand why some women in Women Ed who resisted the label feminism. In another chapter in the book, I explain aspects of digital feminism. The research that underpinned it was carried out with Dr. Jill Berry and published by Open Access in 2019. So that's something that people can get quite easily. Jill has given me permission to write and talk about our work. So of the 19 Women Ed leaders interviewed, 17 Women Ed leaders identified as feminists, 2 with us, and the other 2 with aspects of feminism, even though they rejected the label. They were variously wholly committed to feminism, subverted stereotypes in their embodiment of feminism by, for example, adopting a feminine appearance in Western terms, such as wearing makeup and high heels, or were newly conscious, tentative, reluctant, or resistant of the label. Framed using Cortesi's types of activist, women's self-identification with feminism demonstrated that they were emphatics, wholly positive about identifying as a feminist, accepting the term, even if used disparagingly against them, or they were reconcilers who were tentative or reluctantly reconciling a new identity as a feminist, or definitions to ensure a broad appeal to younger women or men or both, or demarcators who were clear what sort of behaviours they associated with their definition of feminism, including non-traditional ones. And 2 were disidentifiers who aligned themselves with advocacy for social justice in much broader terms. So why does this matter? It matters because all the time we work with, we educate, we lead students and staff who might have very different ways of seeing the social world. The ways they and we see the social world are very much dependent on our socio-cultural histories. Just look at the cultural messages in the photographs I chose to show you from my own story. 1962, there was a christening. There I was in 1969, ringing church bells. That is a clear message about my belief heritage, regardless of whether I am a practicing Christian or not, whether I still hold those beliefs or not. There are photos of me as a teenager, wearing high heels at graduation, wearing makeup for work in my late 20s. Then pictures of me as a school teacher and leader, symbols of achievement in particular roles as a senior leader and academic. As we engage with our gender justice work, with our feminist work, however we frame it, we need to remember that we are differently privileged in our transnational identities. The same applies to the staff of international schools and the students of international schools. And as leaders, we need to be aware of that. Thank you for listening.
Wow, thank you, Dr. Kay, for inspiring and informative session and this quick journey. And many thoughts, many ideas that will take us for our panelist discussion with Maha. Maha, you started introducing yourselves, but I will hand the floor for Zainab if you can help within the chat and the questions also for Esther. So are you ready for our questions? We have our audience on live on Facebook. We also have our attendees for today, and whoever is with us on Twitter chat and activities. So Dr. K, you had started identifying the terminology and different perspectives about that, the importance of identifying and recognizing the different ways and different types of presenting our positionality and how we are trying to reflect on our own practices and our own ideologies. I will comment on the concept of Islam and feminist, but let me also start hearing from Maha. Maha, tell us about your journey. So Dr. K had some photos and shared with us. If you can tell us quickly about your journey within education and also your experiences leading international schools.
First of all, I just want to say, wow, it's a very, Dr. Fala, very intense and deep, discussion and a very, complex topic, to discuss, especially in this region, feminism is, linked to very negative connotations, unfortunately, and no one, I don't want to say no one, but most people don't understand it very well. So in terms of my educational career, I started my career as a teacher, graduated from Qatar University, which is the local university in Qatar. I have been educated all my life in the public system in Qatar and in local schools. After that, I worked as a homeroom teacher and was promoted to a curriculum coordinator, all through the ladder. I later took my master's degree again in education leadership from Qatar University, which is the local university in Qatar. I have 21 experience in education. Half of it was in public schooling system, where I worked in girls only schools with mainly local students and local teachers. And after that, I joined Qatar Foundation, which is a big organization in Qatar that caters for education, research, and community development. Qatar Foundation hosts different kinds of schools, and the aim of Qatar Foundation to host those schools is to create variety in the educational scene in Qatar. The Qatari government don't want to graduate students only from one stream, which is the public system. They want, students in Qatar to be exposed to different systems, so we can have more of an international mindedness and, have different backgrounds for students. So Qatar Foundation schools, are run by international body of faculty and staff, and, host local students, Qatari students, and international students too. So the move, from the local system to the international system within Qatar Foundation was a really big, huge and jump for me. My background, I am a covered Muslim who never have worked with men before. I only worked with, schools that, have female staff and students. So working with an international body of faculty and staff and, being exposed to different mentalities, different background was a huge step for me that I learned a lot, and that is priceless, that has opened my world, have made me much more open-minded and gave me this international understanding of the world. And the purpose of hiring me into those schools was to bring the two worlds that existed in those two schools. So usually in private schools and in international schools, especially recently, you will have a huge student body of local students. Back in the 60s and the 70s, international schools attracted more of the expat community in the countries, but because of financial economic reasons, in the last 10 years, expats left from different countries around the world, and locals are more attracted to those international schools looking for a better educational system and high quality education that can give them access to to elite universities around the world. So for me to be hired in those schools, the purpose was, to make the two worlds that existed in those schools talk to each other. There was the world of the students and the parents who are mainly local, and the world of the faculty who are mainly international. So my task was to make those two worlds speak to each other and understand each other, so they can work, in harmony and collaboratively, and also to address the issue of understanding the identity of the local students who is in a very international context. These students are studying an international curriculum, but people forgot about who they are, what are their values, what is their culture, what's their native language, you know, what are the topics that they need to understand about their history, about their, you know, who they are, so they can be like strong in their identity and who they are before they become global citizens. You know, we cannot create global citizens and people who know about everything that is international, but they don't know, you know, and lack the understanding of who they are. That's why, you know, I started working on those schools to make those two communities, you know, together, and to strengthen the understanding of how can we work with the local student and bring their identity, you know, acknowledged by the teachers that they teach them.
Thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you, Dr. Rania. Sorry, I took so long.
No, it's fine. And you're currently studying your doctorate degree in?
Yes, I'm a student, a doctorate in education student in the University of Southern California. I'm preparing my dissertation in dual language education in Qatar Foundation schools.
Perfect. So starting from Dr. Kay's comment about Islam and feminism, and talking about the perspectives that you gained from the interviewees within your research, and wish you all the best within your upcoming book. We will be so keen to read, hopefully as soon as possible. It's interesting because some would never agree to combine both terms together. Like many researchers would not see any kind of irrelevance, you know, to have Islam and feminism and combined in both them. They see them completely different and from extreme to extreme. Although there are, I think, Dr. Dina Khalil or many researchers had tried to introduce a third wave of feminism, and they said that there is Islamic feminism, and also you had mentioned how Muslim might see this kind of gender issues or their rights or social justice. From your both experiences, what kind of opportunities and challenges that those leading international schools can provide or have? Whoever would like to start. I know that there are, yep, Dr. Kay.
Can you repeat the question? What kind of challenges?
Opportunities or challenges within international schools.
So I mean, I do think that that's part of the point, that you have got staff and students from multiple cultures in international schools, and the leaders are from, are not necessarily from the local culture and context. And so I think that unless leaders take the opportunity to learn about different cultures, then they are not going to understand how the different populations see the world and how people understand gender issues. So I think that we have to be really very careful about making assumptions about women across the globe, that we are not a homogenous group. We are very different. We are informed by our socio-cultural experiences. And so that's why I think that intersectionality is a good way for us to understand some of this. And I think that, you know, I think it has been an issue for not just scholars, but activists and teachers and educators that the word feminism isn't appropriate. And some of the reasons, you know, I tried to talk about, that, you know, that it's associated with the West, it's associated with white women, it's associated with colonialism, and it's not a word that a lot of people want to associate with Islam, but some do. Some do.
Yep. Maha?
Yes, in my own perspective, you know, and I don't know if this is true, but this is how I see it. I believe that Islam supports feminism. You know, Islam, you know, support the women and their right, and always cheering for the women, you know, and we have lots of examples from the Quran and the Hadith, which is the sayings of Prophet, peace be upon him, Muhammad, that always refer to the women, that always give privilege to the women, you know. But people in the world, you know, even the Islamic world don't understand it. They read it in a different way. And I struggle with this personally. And I fear for the future generations, because I feel that especially the young women and everyone don't understand it very well and have this bad connotation, to it, and bad and negative assumptions about it. So if it's in our world like this, how do we expect it in the other world? And especially also we read that, people are linking it to Islam in a very, unfortunately, negative way. But one thing that we need to do in school, if we go back to in schools, that we should embrace each other and we should embrace the cultures that we work in, And so my first tip to all the workers that I work with as a leader, embrace the culture you live in and embrace the people who I work with, and especially the students, and try to really understand where they're coming from, how they are raised, how the parenting works, what is the dynamics in their culture. So you know how to speak to them, and you know how to appreciate, the opportunities that are available to them, so you can work and best educate them and open them, for the future. And also, for the students to be really open-minded and understand what's going on in the world and how people from different perspectives or from different parts of the world see things around them. And this will build their international mindedness, characters and personalities.
Thank you for your comments. For me personally, I would just highlight or focus on how each one would define those terms, and then we can start from that. But having this kind of general assumptions or expectation that you define it the same way that I expect, I think it might cause a little bit of confusion or misunderstanding. So if each one could start with defining and starting from clarifying assumptions. Also, Dr. K, you mentioned something very important, that we assume that we know about those kind of backgrounds or ladies coming from different cultures, and we start generalizing. And I think also, Maha, this applies for ladies coming from Arab countries. We assume because they are Arabs, so that they know and we have the same culture, or we have the same background. But if we look at the colonization and what happened in each country, that would give us a totally different perspective. So we need to go and explore, their education systems, their needs, their cultures, their expectations, and even sometimes the term that they are using. So, having a different term, even if we understand it in our language, but it might not mean the same based on our own policies or our own way of, or cultures, or our own way of living things. And within one of the books that I worked with Dr. Khaled, Rista Rida, and Corinne, hopefully that it will be 2022, we highlighted that just start with clarifying the terms, let's see how we can start with this. Is there any other challenges you think that ladies coming to Middle East or international schools, they might be ready for, or they might be thinking of while they're moving between different places? Or
it's Dr. Filler, please.
No, you carry on.
So basically, it's the different cultures, and how open everyone is, to embrace, and to accept. So definitely women go through lots of challenges, unfortunately, I think all over the world, and especially in schools and education, although mainly women are working on those schools, percentage of women working in schools is way higher than men, but still you don't, they go through those challenges.
Dr. K?
So you would hope that people who are moving between international contexts have a love for embracing different cultures and traditions and customs and peoples. And so you hope that the people who are working in international schools will have that quality, but they might not. We can still make assumptions about one another, and I would say that even within a culture, even within a country, there are different understandings of feminism, and for some feminists want to reject men in their ideas. Personally, I think that women ed is good at including men, for example, in the he for she, and your co-author, Professor Khalid Arar, is a good person to think about in terms of the scholarship on women. You know, when I first met him, he was just so enthusiastic about our field and wanted to promote women in educational leadership. So we have many allies, it would seem to me, and I think that's important too. But I think for staff moving between cultures, it's really important that they listen and hear what people are telling them about how they see how different people see the world, and to accept difference, to embrace difference, that we don't all have to see things in the same way at all.
Interesting. I remember when I used to work international school, we used to give a kind of induction, culture sensitivity. And sometimes, you know, some of the things that we might be doing as a habit might not be understood correctly within the new environment or the new working environment, although that they might have lots of experience or, you know, kind of achievements, but we need, as you mentioned, to be a little bit sensitive about the new environment. And remarkably, that we don't sometimes care about homesickness, and we assume that we're professional enough and we need to be ready and we shouldn't, you know, mention these kind of things, but we need also to be aware of those kinds of things. Is there anything related to leading those international schools in specific, as we're talking about helping and empowering women, you know, to volunteer either for teacher leadership or for any kind of helping and unleashing our potentials? Leadership. So feel free, whoever would like to start.
So definitely, as you mentioned, you know, providing the support, you know, and not assuming that people are fine, you know, so caring for the well-being for the people who work on those schools, especially the expats who are coming, you know, from different, you know, parts of the world without maybe their families or with their family, but in a different way of context. You know, they sometimes feel shy, or they're just worried that they might offend the other culture or the other person. So they always keep quiet, you know. So how can you as a leader make sure that, you know, they understand that this is a safe environment for them, they can ask questions, and that you educate them? It's very important. And I see lots of, you know, international schools or private schools around us that, you know, just are oblivious about this important step of, you know, induction, providing an induction in a cultural, environmental, or cultural understanding, you know, workshops or sessions for new stuff. Even, you know, people who are coming from neighboring country to any country might not know the little things that happen in this culture. So having this knowledge and understanding will make it easier for the staff to blend in the cultural environment and to support the students, you know. So in our schools, we always provide in the beginning of the year a 1 week of cultural understanding sessions, you know, and we speak about all the misconceptions about the culture. We speak about how parenting is happening, you know, what are the likes and dislikes of the students, what are the controversial topics in the students, what are the things that will make students attracted to you and be interested in you as a teacher, you know, how to live in this country, what are the good places to be in, you know, how to be happy, how to care for your well-being with this country, how to deal with parents, how to deal with co-workers, all the little details, you know, the dress code, you know, in much more details, you know, the understanding of the religion of the country, the political issues, you know, the taboos, the things that are not spoken. For example, in Qatar, I found out that there is no basic information that is available for anyone coming into the country. Like, people come, but they only have the very basic information that is in the internet. Like, you know, we speak Arabic, you know, the religion is Islam, do this, don't do that, but they don't speak about, you know, the families, how families, you know, relationships are very important, how students or the children support the family and have different kinds of roles, you know, compared to other children around the world, the expectations, you know, for students and children, the expectations from parents, it's all different, but it's not written anywhere and nobody speak about it. So we speak about all of these things, you know, that they don't know about, and then they will feel at ease and start, you know, using those tips, you know, to connect with families and to connect with students, you know, and to ask questions. You know, we give them the safety that they need, you know, that you can approach us, you can come and ask the leaders in your school or ask the locals around you. how to deal with such a situation, and so on. So, and we don't leave it only in the beginning of the year. We have to do like all year checks, with them to make sure that, are they going through something, do they want to ask a question that they were hesitant to? So always, checking and always providing the knowledge that they need to.
Dr. Kay, you have anything?
I think that you're absolutely right. I think that that Maha has really captured it in terms of the dialogue that needs to happen. This does have to be conversations that people have to have, and I think that it is the responsibility also of the incoming staff to learn about the culture and traditions of the local population. It's not just the responsibility of the school to tell them. So I think it's important that it's a two-way conversation. I think that's vital. But I have been quite, and I'm not talking about the Middle East, I'm talking about other contexts such as South America and Europe and China. But I've been interested in how arrogant some Western teachers and leaders are about the work they do in a particular country context. And I've been quite shocked by the lack of recognition that there needs to be a dialogue with local staff and local families, that people would set up small-scale research projects for their master's degree that didn't appear to want to listen to the Mexican population or the Chinese teachers or the Thai teachers, that it was only about the incoming leadership, who all appeared to be white and Western. So I think there are some huge issues that I'm not in a position to address. There are some huge issues in the international schooling context that need to be addressed, to be honest. I'm thinking now that all of those examples were also white men. They weren't women who were not listening to the local people in those examples in my mind. They happened to be men. And so I don't know if that's something to do with gender as well, that whether women would have a tendency to be listening to people too. But I have heard women leaders in international schools in Europe talking about wanting to change the organizational culture one step at a time. And not necessarily wanting to adopt a very assertive approach to change, but just quietly checking things, correcting things and the way things are done, and challenging things in meetings and how decisions are made. And I think that people can do that at multiple levels. They can do it gently, they can do it quietly. I heard the phrase today on the radio of someone being called a quiet warrior, that someone who continued to struggle, but they did it in a very gentle, quiet way, but they made things happen because they raised those conversations. So I think in answer to your question as to whether women can unleash their leadership, I think that there are ways to do it. And sometimes it's not by being particularly assertive. Sometimes it's by just being gentle and everyday about what we say and do.
I just want to comment about, two things Dr. Kay have said, which is, some of the regions, where there is like, supremacy to the white, leader or white, teacher, and I know some of those countries, and I believe this is from the government itself, on how they treat those, staff members compared to their local students or local citizens. They themselves give this empowerment and don't give equal empowerment to for example, the local teacher or the local administrator. So they created, this kind of power for those people, and so I believe the governments need to deal with it in a different way to fix what's going on. And the experience in Qatar have, started like that, but has changed, drastically, because, now the government focuses a lot on the local leaders, local teachers, and give them, the importance they need, because eventually the local students need, mostly the teachers from their local context, to understand them. So they're treating both sides equally right now. So you don't see this kind of trend that we see sometimes in other regions. And I have been in such a context, as a leader myself, in one of the school I worked, I was the only local Arabic Muslim woman in a team of leaders, in a 10 members, team leaders who are all white men. So you can imagine how challenging and, when I was working, I didn't see the challenges and I didn't feel the stress. But when I left to another context, I thought, wow, this was too much. I felt sometimes, even scrutinizing against me because, they would, for any reason, they would look at me, you are the local, you have to serve it. These are local students, so it's your task to do it. It's your, so as a woman, I felt targeted. As a local, I felt targeted. So these things, exist, for women around the world, I believe.
Interesting. So from your comments, I think that there is a need to highlight the mindset of the leaders themselves, just to understand the culture, needs, and the community, and how they can start communicating or bridging the gaps. Also, for themselves to start empowering themselves despite all the challenges or the difficult situations or different situations that they will start facing. And while we're talking about leaders and teachers, we also need to recognize that there are some challenges related to dealing with the policies or to the systems or regulations within the countries. It differs from a country to another. For example, even if they are following the British system or even if they're following this international system, there are still the implementation or the internal processes of implementing such a system will differ and will might stop or maybe encourage the leaders to flourish, or even to how they're going to highlight that. Now, on the opposite side, sometimes we hear within the communities or from parents or even nations, like those international schools are going to do this and that within our country. So how do you see those kind of assumptions or expectations or bias towards kind of gender perspectives or practices that's happening related to leading an international school in a different culture, how the community would see them, how we can, as you mentioned, Dr. Kay, to bridge the gap between understanding and gradually starting the change if there is a need for the change.
I worry about the dominance of white leaders going into international schools across the world. I mean, it is something that I worry about in the field. Rania, you know this, in the field of educational leadership, we're wanting people to decolonize the field, and yet in our educational practice in international schools, we're recolonizing the field, and so it does worry me. I don't have solutions because I think that countries have to make their own decisions. And as Maha said, that the governments are encouraging local leadership in some country contexts, and that's great. But I do have students writing assignments for me about massive pay gaps between local staff and the expat staff that just seem incredibly unjust, that people are doing the same work and being paid really very differently. So the whole thing worries me, but I don't have an answer. I don't have, I think it is for the people working in those schools to try to work out how they see them, and your group as it is based on international schooling. They are some of the things that you understand rather better than me, I think.
We're all sharing ideas. I think just paving and having such a webinar is one of the answers, or maybe one of the ideas that we start from. Maha, do you have any comments? Or
I believe, we need to talk about it more. We need to write more dissertations, write more books about it. People know it, we can see that, the business is mainly white male, taking the leadership positions in those international schools. I have been in lots of interview panels where we interview women and men and from different ethnicities, and I always see, that everyone selects who. It's the white male, I don't know, it's the image in their ideas, that this person is the right person to lead such a school. And, by experience, when the school starts, it's not necessarily it. There is many issues that goes with it, and I don't want to generalize, we don't want to say like every white male would be such and such, but this is what's going on. There is no opportunity for female, no opportunity for different ethnicities. So more talk about it is very positive.
And you'll be surprised. Thank you for
Yes.
highlighting this, Ma. You'll be surprised that one of my colleagues, she's British, she's Black, and they simply told her that we can't hire you because of your color. We want the leadership. Yeah, it happened here. And they told her, like, we want the photos to be on the website, like white people coming from, although that she's originally British and she